Hi, welcome to the Junot Files. I'm Jim Juno, your host, and this is where we talk about TV, books about TV, movies, Hollywood, everything in between. And if you like what you're seeing, please hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel or on our podcast channel, which is distributed by Apple, Google, Spotify, and on the iHeartRadio and TuneIn app. I'm talking today. He has been on the show before. His new book is called Raising Laughter: How the Sitcom Kept Britain Smiling in the 70s. Robert Sellers, welcome to the show, Robert.
Thanks for having me back.
Yes, welcome back to the show, I should say. You were on when you had your book When Harry Met Cubby, when it was coming out.
And that's right, yes, and this is the sequel. I'll come back for an encore, yes.
Fantastic. Raising Laughter: How the Sitcom Kept Britain Smiling in the 70s. Now, for those of you in America who may not be familiar with some of the shows, we're going to go into that in a second because you may not realize how many American shows were based or inspired by British sitcoms.
I think conversely, I think a lot of people in Britain don't realize as well that these shows went over to America and were such successes. Yeah, so it's two ways. I think a lot of people here don't realize how big some of those shows were in America.
Yeah, and now the 70s in America were I guess characterized by inflation, gas shortages, civil
nothing
unrest.
Much has changed, has it?
No.
The 70s. It's the same here in Britain as well. Gas prices, inflation. We're back to Jimmy Carter and Harold Wilson. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's the second coming of Jimmy Carter, and you're right, Harold Wilson. And
it's perfect timing for this book, of course. With anything 70s, yeah. We have to learn how to live like we did in the 70s. Yeah.
That's right. And now the book you're profiling a lot of situation comedies that were on in the UK in the 1970s. Two of them that come to mind for me is was Steptoe and Son a 70s show? That was more of a 60s.
And originally, that's sort of one of you could almost sort of call it the grandfather of sitcom, certainly a British sitcom. It started in the early 60s. Black and white, very antiquarian if you watch it now, but it was a huge success in Britain. One of those shows where when it was on, the pubs were empty because everybody was at home watching. Half the country watched it. It was one of those kind of shows, which I think you don't get in America, do you? Because it's such a vast continent that you don't have that thing that we have in Britain, where a single program, literally half the country can watch it, and you go to work the next day and pretty much everyone in the office has seen it and you can all talk about it, and it has that sort of amazing sort of community moment that people all watch the same thing, which I guess you don't get in America unless it's a huge sporting event or something. But yeah, it was a huge success in the 60s, and it ended in about 1965, 66, and then it came back in 1970 and was the first sort of show of the 70s. So I started the book with that. So it's a nice link between sort of the old sitcoms of the 60s and the new decade, as it were. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that how popular this show was. William Bramble was the star of it. And in America, you'll know him more probably being the grandfather in the movie A Hard Day's Night.
Yes. Yeah, when he was famous, he was known at the time as Steptoe. So obviously, a lot of Americans wouldn't have known who he was, but everybody in the United Kingdom would have all said, "That's Steptoe." Yeah, so he was very identifiable as Steptoe at the time. So yeah, it was a nice piece of casting because he plays the part almost as if he's Steptoe. Yeah.
But he's very clean. That's the ongoing joke. He's very clean, and Americans don't know that, but because on Steptoe and Son, he was kind of physically filthy all the time.
Yeah, Yeah, that's the joke, you know. Yeah, yeah. He's one of these people who they're rag and bone men. So he's going around with the horse and cart, and he's got the bucket at the end. You know, at the end of the day, it's pretty much full of manure, and he sort of has to sort of, you know, press it down to put some more in, and then he doesn't wash his hands, and then he has his lunch, he has his sandwiches. You know, that's where the expression "you dirty old man" comes from, which is the son Harold, you know, steptoe and son. You know, it's a father and son business, and he sort of aspires to the middle class. He wants to be sort of a bohemian. You know, he loves art and books and stuff. But his father is just this absolutely as common as muck is an expression we have in Britain. You know, but the interesting thing is with the two characters, the two actors who played the parts, Wilfrid Bramble, who we've mentioned, and Harold H. Corbett, who played the son, who in the 1950s was quite a distinguished Shakespearean actor, and then he got cast in this sitcom where he suddenly became incredibly famous as this character, and he would be recognized. He would come out of the TV studio pretty much dressed as he was in the show, so all the people outside the studio all went up to him and got his autograph. Wilfrid Bramble, on the other hand, it was a complete metamorphosis. He was in real life, he was a real dandy. You know, he'd wear a waistcoat, because when he played the part, he took his false teeth out. He wouldn't shave for about 3 days before recording. So he was incredibly scruffy. And when he came out, he had a waistcoat, his hair was parted, his teeth were in, and nobody recognized. He would be able to walk past the audience who had just watched him, and no one would recognize him. Yeah.
Kind of
Which
like
was
what?
interesting because, of course, Harry Corbett felt very typecast in the show, you know, whereas Wilfrid could sort of escape, you know, and play different things. Yeah, that's an interesting thing with sitcom, isn't it? Where you become so identified because it's seen by so many people, you know, every week.
Right.
That actors can become so identified with a particular role. It can, I wouldn't say destroy a career, but it certainly limits a career, doesn't it? Particularly with some shows. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize here in America, now here in the U.S., people will know Sanford and Son, the TV show,
Yeah.
but they don't realize that it was a direct rip, well, you want to call it a rip off or a
Well, they had to pay for it, I would imagine.
yes, they would have to
pay the BBC some money to have it. Yes, yeah. It
But
was such a great idea. Yeah, yeah. I think that the writers were asked to come over to Los Angeles. Galton and Simpson, who I had the privilege to meet and interview, they came over to Los Angeles. This was before 72, wasn't it, when it began?
Mm-hmm.
This was in the sort of the late 60s. About 5 years before, a different TV company wanted to do it, and it never worked out. But they brought the writers to Los Angeles, and they had a meeting, and Steptoe and Son set in London, in the East End of London. But for the American version, they didn't know where to set it. So they thought, if we set it in New York, people will think that the characters are Jewish. If we set it in Boston, they'll think they're Irish. So they didn't know where to ethnically place it. And then one of the writers said, well, why can't we make them black? Why don't we make them black? And they thought, that's a brilliant idea, but impossible. We can't do it because at the moment, a black character on mainstream American television had to be seen as upwardly mobile. So they had to be doctors or lawyers. I Spy is a great case in point, isn't it, with Bill Cosby as this dashing debonair spy.
Or the Cosby Show.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the early 70s, when another television company wanted to do Steptoe and Son in America, by that time, the idea was fine to cast them as a black, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because they had the meeting and they said, do you mind if we cast them with black actors? And the writers said, well, we had that idea 5 years ago. And they, well, we couldn't do it then, but we can now. The 70s had changed. And you could have sort of, it's white collar, isn't it? Blue collar and white collar. You know, it had completely changed. So it was acceptable to do that. I guess because of films like Shaft, where, you know, the urban city had become sort of very popular in American culture, I guess. The urban landscape. Yeah, so you could do it. Yeah,
That's right. Even it invaded the James Bond films. At least one of it was set in, I believe, Louisiana,
yeah.
and it was it looked like they were African, trying to Africanize the James Bond characters.
Yeah.
But also there were some. There's another one, Faulty Towers, which didn't make it to America as a remake, but made it to America on public television with John
Oh, I didn't
Cleese.
know that. I know. Oh, right. Yes, it was. Yeah, but they tried to Americanize it. I think they had three attempts at it, and it didn't work. That's what people. I mean, there's pilots being made all the time in America, same as in the UK. So many shows we never see because they're made as a pilot, and they never see the light of day. And Faulty Towers was, I think they piloted it 3 times. Once with Harvey Korman playing the John Cleese role, and Harvey Korman is a supreme comic. I mean, Mel Brooks, he's done so many Mel Brooks films. I think his performance in Blazing Saddle is one of the greatest comedic performances of all time. And he's just wonderful in that film. But even he couldn't make it work. So yeah, some sitcoms are tried. There's another one, Dad's Army. I don't know how popular Dad's Army is in America, but again, that they made a pilot of that, and they sort of Americanized it, and it didn't work. I think the reason probably was because the scenario of if no one's familiar with Dad's Army, but it's about during the Second World War, the early years of the Second World War, and there was it's called the Home Guard, where if you were too old to join the army, you became sort of the army at home in case the Germans invaded. So you would help out. And I think the reason it didn't work in America was America was never under threat of invasion, was it, during the war?
Right.
So I don't think the viewers would be able to relate to that in the way that the British people could. And Dad's Army became, I think it ran for about 8-9 years on British television, was probably one of the most famous sitcoms ever produced in this country. Yeah, but it didn't translate to America.
And when I was saying about Faulty Towers, I call it the Monty Python tract, because Monty Python's Flying Circus came across America lock, stock, and barrel. It was the British TV show, just aired in America on PBS. Faulty Towers was the same way. It was John Cleese and his group. But there was another one in Britain, which was quite controversial in Britain, called Till Death Do Us Part. And a lot of people don't realize that one of the most famous sitcoms in America, All in the Family, was based on that movie, based on that TV show.
Absolutely. Alf Garnett. He's called Alf Garnett in the UK. He's sort of this bigot, basically. That's a perfect word to describe it. A bigot. Yeah. You don't need to say anything else. You just say he's a bigot, and everybody knows what that means. And Archie Bunker, played by Carol O'Connor. Again, no one would realise that character was based on a British character. I don't think the show. I mean, the show. I mean, I've seen episodes of All in the Family, and you wouldn't know that it's based on the British show. I think they just take the template, don't they, and then they reimagine it, for an American audience, because an American audience is so very different to a British audience. You can't make the same show. But yeah, he became something of a television icon. I don't know if you can you show that program on American television? Because the show that it was based on in Britain was In Sickness and in Till Death Us Do Part. In Sickness and Health was a later version. That show can't really be shown on British television anymore, because it's seen as sort of, shall we say, un-PC, because it's so bigoted. Even though he's the joke, he's the butt of the joke. But his bigoted views are just so, I think particularly the new generation would watch it with horror, So I don't know whether the Archie Bunker is viewed the same way in America. But he's even though he's, as I say, he's the butt of all the jokes. That he's look
Yeah.
on life would not be tolerated now on television.
That's a good question. In this, what we call the woke era in America, would that show, even in reruns, be allowed to be on the air now?
Yeah.
So
This is the situation that's happening now in Britain. I mean, we just mentioned Fawlty Towers. Well, one of the episodes was they were showing all the two series on television, but one of the episodes was they didn't show because it has a certain word in it, and there was a huge uproar in the newspapers and commentators, and they reinstated it. But there are some shows that are not shown anymore. One's called On the Buses. Does that ring any bells?
I'm sorry,
that was an early 70s sitcom, which was incredibly popular, and they made 4 films. There were 4 film spin-offs of it. It was so popular, and that became Lots of Luck. If anyone knows.
Oh, now I know Lots of Luck with Dom DeLuise. Yeah,
that's right. That was sort of in the British version. He's a bus driver, but in Lots of Luck, he works in the lost property department of a bus station. Yeah, so they slightly changed it. Yeah. But it was the basic template. The characters are basically the same. So that's enough. I don't think that was a huge success. But that show, On the Buses, does not get shown on British television anymore because it is seen as very un-PC now. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't very good to start with, but yeah. It's racist, it's sexist, it's homophobic, and just the attitudes and the dialogue. It just can't be shown anymore.
And there's a couple of shows, recent shows. One was highly successful in the United States, based on their British version, was called The Office.
Yes. Yep.
And then one which was a success in Britain, but flopped horribly in the United States, called Coupling.
Yeah.
But even though Friends in America, the TV show Friends, was based on Coupling, they tried to bring over a Coupling clone and didn't rewrite any of the jokes. So, and what they learned was that Americans laugh at different things than British people do.
Yeah. I mean, you can't take a script and say, just there you are. That happened in a program called The Fosters in Britain, which was the first all-black sitcom in Britain. So it was quite a breakthrough. And that was based on an American show, which I can't quite bring to mind, but that was based on a show about a black family in America. But it might ring a bell for you. I don't know.
Maybe the Jeffersons.
It may be. It doesn't ring any bells.
Or Good Times, maybe, something.
That rings more of a bell, actually. Good Times, yeah. But but the point is that they literally asked for the same scripts, and they weren't adapted. They just had the original American scripts and just did those, and it just didn't work. It lasted 1 series, maybe 2. It didn't work because of that. You have to adapt, because American people laugh at different things. I'm not sure nowadays. I think we're all pretty much on a plateau now, I think, but certainly back in the 70s and 80s, I think we had very different tastes in humor.
Oh, exactly.
There was more, something like Python was huge in America, but sort of on a college level, wasn't it? I don't think people sort of sitting in sort of middle class Virginia would but it was a huge hit on campuses, but now it would be more spread out. I think the acceptance of it, but so yeah.
Now, why were the sitcoms such an important part of the British lifestyle back in the 70s? Because was it because of the I don't want to say unrest, but the items that were going on outside TV? It was a troubling time for Britain, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people needed a laugh. Yeah, because I wouldn't say it's a bit of a cliche to say it was a bit depressing, but there was the energy crisis, like in America, the inflation, gas prices. There were strikes going on. A 3-day week came in at one point. There were power cuts. There's old news footage of people going around supermarkets shopping, and in the darkness with a candle on the carrier, on the the shopping basket, so they could see their way around. So it was pretty bad. And I think why the sitcoms were so popular was you'd have them on pretty much every single day. They were so prevalent. They were all over. You know, you'd have one. Well, we only had two channels. That was another thing. We only had two channels in Britain in the 70s. BBC and ITV, which was the commercial TV. Now we've got, like America, it's all over. We've got satellite, and, you know, Netflix and everything. But back in the 70s, just two channels. So of course, when you came home from the office and you had your dinner and you sat in front of the telly, you had literally two choices to watch, whatever. You know, but so I think the sitcom, whether you liked them or not, you know, it was usually what you ended up watching. But I grew up in the 70s, so I was about 6, 7, in the mid 70s, and I seem to remember that there was, during the week, they were never on at the weekends for some reason. You never had a sitcom at the weekend. It was usually variety shows and big films and things, and sporting things. But on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, and you'd usually, sometimes you'd have two sitcoms. So you could watch one on the BBC and it would finish, and then usually you could turn over to the other channel and they'd have a sitcom just about to start. So, and they were always on at peak time. So at 7:30, 8 o'clock, which is the peak time. There was a sitcom, and as I say, some of these sitcoms commanded incredible audiences. Half the country would be watching sometimes. You know, incredible. So they became embedded in our culture. Really, some of those shows are so. Even today, people, if you were to go up to someone in the street and say, "Tell me a funny line or a catchphrase," I don't know. Do American sitcoms have catchphrases? If you know what a catchphrase is,
yeah, like
that a prevalent thing in American culture, in American sitcom. Like Archie Bunker, does he have a famous thing that he always used to say?
Stifle, Edith. Yeah, and
so yeah, I guess you could go up to someone and say, "What did Archie Bunker?" and they know it immediately. And it's the same in Britain. You know, there's certain characters.
It's like the Simpsons nowadays with all their catchphrases.
Oh, yeah.
But that's amazing. I mean, it's amazing that
these things, they stay with you. It's incredible. They stay. You know, there's all these sitcoms, and you say, "What did Frank?" There's a character called Frank Spencer. That's a show that was. Did that come get to America? Some mothers do have them. I don't think that went to America. And Michael Crawford, who is very famous in America, Michael Crawford. He played this character called Frank Spencer, who was sort of a slow-witted chap who always got into trouble, and it was and he had a catchphrase called "Ooh Betty," which and you'd have kids in the playground impersonating him, saying these catchphrases. So they do become part of your life, these shows, because you start playing with kids and impersonating the characters and saying what they say, and it becomes sort of part of your growing up. These shows, a lot of people grew up with them, and a lot of people have been reading this book and putting reviews on Amazon are saying that, you know, all the memories come back when they read about it.
It's fantastic. Well, Robert Sellers, the book is Raising Laughter: How the Sitcom Kept Britain Smiling in the 70s. Again, thank you, Robert, for being on the Junot Files today.
No, my pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me back.